This is the SIIM Clinical Data Informaticist, or CDI Series. This particular video is another interesting installment of DICOMweb and FHIR ImagingStudy Resource. My name is Teri Sippel Schmidt, and I'm adjunct professor at Marquette University and the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Conflict of interest is pretty much non-existent. And today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about two things. You're going to learn how to read a DICOMweb URL and even construct one if you so choose. And the second thing that you're going to learn is how we relate this information to a FHIR R4 ImagingStudy Resource. So how do we link the EMR along with the DICOM PACS or VNA, Vendor Neutral Archive? Well, the first thing that you should do is you should join SIIM. Joining SIIM gives you access to all sorts of information, including DICOM tutorials, details. It gives you the SIIM annual meeting and all the different sessions. It's well worth the money. However, if you're not convinced yet, first watch the other SIIM, CDI, DICOM tutorials on the external public website. But to really learn DICOMweb, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick peek at the DICOM standard, and then we're going to jump right into the DICOM cheat sheet. To get to the DICOM standard, I'm just going to come here and I'm going to type in DICOM standard. And sure enough, dicomstandard.org. So to get to the standard itself, you click here on standard. And as you can see, there are a lot of different sections or different parts to the DICOM standard. This takes a lot of time to go through. Up here, we have interesting things like the information object definitions, what actually defines a CT image, for example. Down here, we have web services at part 18. Part 16, we have all sorts of content mapping resources, which are also value sets. A lot of information in here, thousands of pages. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to here and we're going to go to the DICOM web cheat sheet, because it's just a whole lot faster. You'll notice that the DICOMweb cheat sheet is actually published by DICOM. So this is the DICOMweb cheat sheet. And you can see over here that you've got the DICOM DINSI services. You've got query, retrieve, store capabilities. Then you also have some DICOM URLs around workflow. When you convert those to RESTful services, you get the HTTP verbs of get. Down here, you've got a post. Here you've got a put. And even down here, you've got to delete, but let's not delete any images. Those are only for workflow items. And then over here on this side, you can see some DICOMweb attributes. We'll get to this in just a minute. And then down here, example. Let's start with a query. When we are using a query, we're going to use the HTTP verb of get. And here's the URL syntax that we're going to use. You can see that you've got the word studies here, slash, and then the brackets mean the attribute value. So this is studies, bracket is going to be a study instance UID, or also known as 20D, if you're looking at the DICOM data dictionary. Then you've got the series, and you can do series where, or you can come down here if you already know the series UID, and you can just put in the series UID. And similarly, you can add instances, or you could do a slash and put in the instance UID. And we're going to look at an example of this in just a second. Now, to retrieve, a retrieve is also a get. So it's going to be similar, but here you're no longer doing a query for attributes. You're doing a retrieve. So you're going to do the get, and here you're just going to use all the study UID, the series UID, or the instance UID, and a frame number. So you're not going to have the where symbol. Also, I want to point out that there are retrieve modifiers, and these are really, really useful. One modifier is metadata, which retrieves only the header. Now remember that these studies are huge, absolutely gigantic compared to FHIR and EMR information. So sometimes you only want to retrieve the DICOM headers. There's no pixel data involved, which is going to dramatically reduce the size of your payload. The other thing that you could do if you don't want to have to render a DICOM study, which is non-trivial because it's not a JPEG, it's a special DICOM format because of the depth of the pixel data. You can use the rendered retrieve modifier, and you'll actually get a view of the image. And then also you can post the study, and then you can give it the study UID. You can see that here you've got for the query, you've got the get study series where, and you can add the different types of matching. And you can also tell it whether you want fuzzy matching, true or false. You can put a limit on the number of returns. You can also offset to index into your response. On retrieve, there's also a couple of different keys that you can use, including, for example, the quality of the image that you want returned, which may, if you're on a mobile phone, may include a lossy factor. It includes height and width of viewports, or it can also include the grayscale index, because remember, these are often 12-bit images. So let's go take a look. I'm going to jump into an application known as Postman. If you're a software developer, chances are you're already familiar with Postman. If you're not, then you probably should be. So this particular server, I'm going to use what's called the SIIM Hackathon server. Now, for this to work, I need to put in a special key for a very minimal sense of security. It's a special API key, which is free through SIIM. So yet another reason to join SIIM is you can get a hold of the SIIM Hackathon server, which supports DICOMweb. So here I've got my endpoint. I've got HTTP. You can see right here, it's a GET. The URL or the endpoint is going to be hackathon.sim.org, DICOMweb. And then here you can see the actual DICOMweb URL. Here you've got studies / a very long and ugly study instance UID, also known as element 20D out of the DICOM header. Here you've got the word series, which is part of the URL definition for DICOMweb. And there you've got a very long series UID, which is 20E in the DICOM standard. And then you've got the instances. And so you can have one or more instances defined. And here I've said the first frame of the instances. I can go ahead and hit send and it'll come back quite quickly. Now you can see, however, that this is a binary image and there's really not much for you to see. Now, of course, you could download this and put it into a different application, or I could do something slightly different. This is the same study. This is the same URL, but here I've added the modifier rendered. I'm going to go ahead and hit send. I'm getting a status of 200, so it's working. That here, at least I'm getting something that we can recognize as an image. It looks like it's a chest x-ray. You can see that by just adding that one word, you can go from downloading binary versus actually being able to see something. Now, Postman doesn't do a great job of rendering, but you get the idea. Okay, that's a quick overview of DICOMweb. Now, how are we going to relate this imaging study and all of these instance UIDs and series and study UIDs back into the EMR or some other application? Let's talk about the FHIR R4 ImagingStudy Resource. Okay, how to get started here? Well, of course, join SIIM because there are additional learning resources at SIIMU. Let's jump right into the HL7 FHIR R4 standard. Or back to our regular internet browser. So we're going to type in FHIR Resources R4. And that will bring me to the FHIR Resources page. Now, make sure that you look up here and it says HL7 FHIR Release 4. I'm going to click on the resource types page if I'm not already there. You might start here at the home page, then click on the resource types. If you're familiar with FHIR R4, which is the most common version of FHIR, there are different classes of resources. A resource is an information object definition in DICOM, or it's an object definition in computer science. So there's different levels of resources. Here we have the foundational resources. Here we have the base resources like patient and practitioner, and what is an organization and what is a device. So here we have the clinical level of resources, and you can see that we have allergy intolerance, and we have observations such as lab measurements, and we have medications and medication requests, and we have diagnostic reports. And down here a little further under diagnostics, we also have imaging study. You can see that this number here, 3, is the maturity level. A maturity level of 3 means that it could still change, but it's reasonably solid and it's been tested. A maturity level of 1 is a bit difficult to rely on. A maturity level of N is normative, and that you can definitely rely on. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to click the imaging study resource. We can look at the scope of the resource. You should definitely read all of these things, but we're going to scroll down to the resource content, and we're going to take a look at the structure itself. The name is imaging resource, and it inherits from a resource called domain resource, which means it's clinical. Up here, we have the name of all the elements. We're going to skip flags for right now. Cardinality is whether or not it's required in FHIR. Type is what the data type looks like or what it refers to. And then description and constraints. If you're not familiar with these columns, please go ahead and take a look at the FHIR video as part of the CDI Informaticist series. The first element that you notice here is identifier, and that's a business identifier. So chances are that in an imaging study resource, this is going to be a study number. It could also be, however, a study UID. Now you'll notice that status is one of the very few required fields, but the status has a defined options of registered, available. Chances are that most of the imaging study resources that you will see will in fact have a study status of available, which just means that it's available to be seen in the imaging PAC system or the imaging vendor neutral archive, VNA. Modality comes right out of the imaging study, out of 860. Study is actually a pointer. It's a reference back to another object because FHIR is very object-oriented and very object-based. So here you can see that the study is a reference back to a patient. There may or may not be an encounter. An encounter is a reference back to an encounter over time about all the things that were grouped together in a particular hospital stay, for example, or over a particular date range. Started is the study start date and time for this particular study. It's probably based on a service request, also known as an order in HL7 version 2, but that's probably what it's going to reference. It could also reference a care plan. And the referrer is the ordering practitioner or the ordering physician, and that will be a different object in FHIR as well. The interpreter is the radiologist who actually looked at the exam. The endpoint is a study access endpoint, so it's a server identifier as part of the URL where the images are stored. Chances are this is actually your PACS or your imaging VNA. Number of series is literally the number of series in the study. Number of instances is the number of images or objects in a study. Procedure code. Procedure code is for example, CT of the head, MR of the leg, X-ray of the chest. You'll notice that this is a codable concept data type. Hopefully, we are either using or mapping to the LOINC codes, which were previously known as Radlex Playbook, but by mapping to the LOINC codes and using procedure codes that are standardized is much easier to aggregate data later. Location is actually location to an organization. So it's actually an address or it's a location of where this particular study was performed. Reason code. Reason code, for example, headache. I don't know that getting the reason code out of this particular object is the best idea. There's probably other places in the EMR where this data is more reliable, and chances are it's probably simply just not here. But you might want to actually go pull this reason code out of different objects in the EMR. Study description. This is a scary field. Anything could be in here, but sometimes it's really useful. Then we get down, you'll notice, to the series level. So there could be 0 to an infinite number of series associated with this study. The first element you'll see here is series UID. That's the series UID mapped directly out of the DICOM header. The number, this is for a computer, this is for a person. Number is usually 1, 2, 3, 4. Modality. Now, remember that in DICOM, modality can vary by series. It's at the series level because you can have a study which has, for example, both PET and CT in it. Description is series description. This is another field which contains a lot of human error. It's a text field, but sometimes, again, it can be really useful, and sometimes it's all you have to go off of to know which particular series to pick up. For example, if you're running an AI algorithm on a particular series, because you're usually going to run an AI algorithm on a series of images, not a study. Number of instances tells you how many images are in that series. Endpoint, where is it stored? If it's different from the entire study, that's unusual. Usually use the one above. Body site is what is the different body part. Is it an arm? Is it a leg? Is it a head? Here they recommend SNOMED CT. That's still a little bit up for debate. Other sites are using different body part codes. It doesn't matter so much as you're using a coding system for body part because you can always map it. Laterality is left or right. For example, if it's an arm, left arm or right arm. Started is the start date and time of the series. Performer is typically the technologist. And then we come down here and you're going to have a series of instances within each study. So these are your actual images. And you will see here, you've got a SOP instance UID for every single image in DICOM. SOP class is going to be, for example, CT storage. It's related to modality, but it's not only in modality. Number is going to be the human readable number for this particular image. Usually it's going to be like 1 through 2000 or whatever it may happen to be. It's pretty rare that you're going to see this title. Title is description of an image. The only time you're really going to see that is if, for example, it's unique. It's a DICOM structured report object with AI results in it. They're probably going to put a title on it. If it's filled in, it can be really useful. There's one more thing I'd really like to show you. And if I come back up to the top of the resource imaging study content, we have something here. There's examples, there's detailed descriptions, and there's also mappings. We're not going to go into the profiles and extensions right now. We're going to focus on the mappings, but you should discover these other tabs on your own. If I scroll down quite a bit, I go past HL7 version 2, which isn't even filled in. RIM is HL7 version 3. Let's not worry about that right now. I come down here to this section, which is DICOM tag mapping. This is a really useful table. This is the FHIR element name on the left-hand side for the imaging study resource. And over here is the DICOM attribute number for the DICOM header. We've got identifier, and they're recommending, this is not required, but they're recommending mapping it to study instance UID to a session number and issuer, which is kind of like the order number in the issuer, or study ID. You come down here and you've got modality at 861. Really the subject should get referenced back to an ID for FHIR. Started, they're giving you the start date and time for the study. Here, refer is the physician. If it's filled in here, chances are it's not. Chances are you're going to pull that out of a different FHIR, like the service request object, and complete that there. Interpreter is the radiologist name. And here it gives you all the other DICOM attributes that you're going to map from the DICOM header. But just remember that sometimes there's better places to pull this information out of for some of these. For series UID, it needs to come out of the DICOM header. For things like reason code, like what was the reason for the study, there's probably better places in the EMR to get this data than out of the DICOM header. As a matter of fact, it probably won't even be in the DICOM header. Go ahead and take a look at these. This mapping is really useful. And on that note, we're going to pop back into our PowerPoint for just a second. And in conclusion, we hope this gave you an overview for how to read and construct a DICOMweb URL. We hope it gives you an overview for how to take a look at a FHIR R4 ImagingStudy Resource. But please be aware that there's a huge void that we haven't talked about at all, which is called security, and that's a world unto itself. Finally, please connect with SIIM. Join us on social media at SIIM Tweets. Follow the hashtag #SIIM. Take a look at our website. And most importantly, join SIIM. Thanks and have a great day. And join us for the next CDI video.